Hi, everyone. This is Victor Cheng from SaaSCEO. It is my pleasure to interview Cassindy Chao, who is a professional matchmaker at Kelleher International and her own firm, AWM Love. Let me give you a little background on Cassindy. Super impressive. She is a matchmaker with over 20 years experience at the elite Kelleher International. That is the firm that you see in all the airplane in-flight magazines for decades and decades when you're on the road. And started her career off in investment banking at Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, has been a fintech startup CEO, sort of roamed the halls of Silicon Valley in a variety of roles, and now finds herself in the role as a professional matchmaker. And so what I really wanted to talk with Cassindy about today is advice for CEOs who are dating and advice for how to nurture their romantic relationships. So Cassindy, thank you and welcome to the talk today.
Thank you so much, Victor. I love hearing about your stories.
So Cassindy, thank you for joining me today. I was reading your client list and it's super impressive. So I want to share this with the audience. You've worked with as a matchmaking service provider to a Nobel laureate, a principal dancer at a ballet company, CEO of a Fortune 500 company, CEO of a private equity company, professors at elite East Coast universities, investment bankers, lawyers, attorneys, doctors, the whole nine yards. And so I'm super excited to dive into our topic today and hear what you've learned from all those experiences.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to this.
Let's sort of transition and talk about relationships. And as a professional matchmaker, it's about finding the right people, connecting, dating, and ultimately having a long-term relationship. For those who are sort of in that dating phase, what are some strategies and tips and maybe some counterintuitive ideas for how people should approach dating? You hear a lot about it. I've done it. I'm not super thrilled with the whole process and, very app driven. I feel like romance is now down to a database record, which, I have some strong feelings about. But from your point of view, like how should the rest of us be approaching dating? Any suggestions and tips?
Absolutely. I laugh because nobody enjoys online dating. That's the majority of dating these days. Nobody says, "Oh, I can't wait to go online." So I think the gist of my tips for today really center around attitude and approach. I think that makes such a difference. When people meet, the whole goal of whether it's online dating or matchmaking is just to meet that person. And so I think first is be deliberate. And one thing that I would say some people get friend zoned is be deliberate. And I think that what I mean by that is have the confidence that if that person is on a coffee date with you or lunch date with you, that they are curious about you. Don't go in trying to impress them and try to, be confident. Just don't get friend zoned from the get-go. Make a compliment. They're there because they want to meet you. So therefore you can come back and let them know right off the bat. Make a statement that is not a friend zone. Like, "Oh, you look really great today." That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's so important is that first attitude. The second point I would say is be curious about your dates. Ask a question. Sometimes people get so nervous and they're so keen to present themselves, they don't necessarily understand what their date's perspective is, and they don't necessarily ask enough questions. And so what I do as a trick with some of my clients is I will tell them before they go on a date, "I'm going to ask you afterwards how your date went, and I have a questionnaire that you fill out, a survey." And so they know in the back of their heads that I'm going to be asking them to tell me 3 things about their date. And that changes the mindset. So they know that when they go in, they're going to have to ask their date some questions, and that stops them from just talking about themselves. Me. I'm this, I'm that. And so I think that mindset change is really important.
Yeah, let me just pause for a second on that because you have two great gems there. First, the phrase friend zone, right? Not everyone's going to understand that. It's a very international,
Okay.
At least 60, probably 100 different countries in terms of this interview. So how would you define friend zone for those who may not be familiar with that particular expression?
Okay, friend zone means that you take what is supposed to be a romantic meeting, a meeting to ascertain chemistry into just a business meeting or a friend meeting. And so I think what happens is people are afraid of rejection, right? And so if we're on a date, Victor, and 25 years ago when we were all young. And I said, oh, let's go, work on this case study together. That's just, then there's no rejection, right? Oh, we're all working on this. Whereas instead, if you and I said to each other, like, wow, you look really nice today. I love how you look in that jacket, or something like that. Or, oh, would you like to have dinner? Things like that are much more deliberate. And I think that's what I mean by not getting friend zoned, because we're afraid of rejection. So sometimes our backup stance is to go into the friend zone. And I think it's important not to do that. Just know that the person is actually there because they want to meet you. They're curious about you. Come with that mindset first.
Got it. And so when I hear the term friend zone, it's being a guy, I hear it from a very male centric point of view from others, and it's the woman, for heterosexual cisgender dating, it's the woman put me in the friend zone, right? It's like this action that happened to you, and I think using some terminology I've heard, what I'm hearing from you is that it sounds like some of the sometimes people put themselves in the friend zone by acting more like a platonic friend on what was supposed to be a date than having and conveying romantic interest. And I guess what I'm hearing is, if you want to be on a date, act like you're on a date, as opposed to just catching up with a friend for coffee, right?
Exactly. Absolutely. You nailed it.
Great. I'm so fascinated by the questionnaire you give your clients. So you're assessing them on not just how well the date went from their point of view, you're assessing them on how well did they get to know their date. And so tell me more about that, because I hear, I have a lot of women friends, and a lot of them complain about like the guy that just talks endlessly about himself and he's quite impressive, but didn't ask me a single question over an hour and a half, right? So do you see that? How common is this issue in your clientele? And is this a skill that can be trained to be sort of more inquisitive, right? More curious about their date? I'm curious about that.
It's very common. And it's, especially for for mid-level professionals and above, right? It's very common. And it's not just women or men, it's both. Both sides are so programmed to just talk about themselves, and they lead with their career quite often, because that's how our society sometimes defines us and our self-worth, by our careers, where it really should be about, can I get along with this person? Do I want to live with this person? Just, doesn't matter whether they're CEO of a firm, whether they're the top antitrust lawyer at their partnership. Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's can two people get along and coexist? So I think that perspective is really important to really bring people back down to kind of who they are underneath. And that's important to change that mindset, to understand everybody wants to be understood. Everybody wants to be heard. So it's important to make it both ways.
It's where I had this sort of moment. This is maybe just me, but hearing Asian American women talk about being heard and understood.
That's a big topic.
That is a big topic. It's an amazing topic, and I think it reminded me, because when we first met, we had talked about a lot of this stuff, about essentially topics related to emotional depth, right, and connection and emotional intimacy. I don't think we use those words, but that was sort of what came up in my head, and. So I just had a moment of how amazing is this, of having these sort of two things I see as very separate, right? Asian culture in particular, and sort of this deep intimacy. They don't usually go together in the same sentence. And so it's amazing that we're having this conversation, and specifically with you. With your clients getting to know their dates, give me some examples of questions, like if they don't know how to do it, like what are the questions they should be asking, right? You learn by sort of doing things mechanically if you're not used to it, until it gets natural and sort of built some automatic, sort of default proficiency. But can you give me some examples of questions that you would recommend people ask their dates?
That's a good one. Sometimes it sounds silly, but just be very granular. Like, how was your weekend? What did you do? when was the last time you spoke to, or tell me about your college roommate, stories that, I would start off first with something that's somewhat neutral, that's not too, it won't make people feel too exposed. And over time, then you can open up in other areas, right? The key is just to get the tempo of communication. And people love talking about maybe their pets, their children, a great meal that they had. And those are just ways just to get started. And sometimes you can start going into certain relationships. You don't want to start off with, oh, how was your ex?
That's a landmine.
I just wanted to say, I do really love your perspective on Asian Americans. And when we talked last, I thought that was so important, and it resonated with me so much because it is a shared experience and it is a unique experience. But yet there's certain ties there that are irrelevant for many people. It doesn't matter just Asians. But I think, for Asians, we're fighting against stereotypes. We're and how to, it's not just friend zone. I think, for example, whether Asian men or Asian women, there are certain stereotypes that we have to fight against or how to undo. And not with anger or resentment, but also just to rise above it and make it into a positive. And here's an interesting thing, I think, with Asian men, is that there have been a lot of negative stereotypes. And I've been writing a blog about how it's time for an Asian male renaissance, because I think Asian men actually make some of the best dates because they're family oriented, they're financially sound. Everybody's asking for that. And there they are. But I think sometimes for Asian men, they may forget that, hey, you're actually quite solid in the dating world, but it also means putting yourself out there. And I think sometimes people don't know that the world has started to shift, and that's important, for example. I'm digressing.
No, right. So a couple of things I want to tease out here. So we talked a little bit about stereotypes, right? And so one thing I noticed, when I've done online dating, I have felt the stereotypes because I track my metrics, right? I'm analytically driven. And then of course. I got spreadsheets. I have a lot of spreadsheets. And that my experience in sort of connecting in that dating way in person is quite different than online, right? Because I think the stereotypes are more prominent. You see a picture, you assume a lot. And then in person, it's much more experiential. And I do better in person, right, than online. And one of the things that you had talked about, I want to sort of tie these strands together, is about asking your date questions and having them be granular. And one of the things I like to teach about building these conversational skills, because a lot of folks I work with, that's not what they're known for, right? They're known for being in the background, not being extroverted, they're being more introverted, doing good work, in terms of their careers. But as you progress, it's much more relational, right? You're managing people, you're interacting with people, you're representing your firm, you're becoming a spokesperson, a leader, or a thought leader. So one of the conversational tips I want to sort of put an exclamation point on, because you had talked about it, was I like this idea of asking people questions based upon something you just learned about them within the last 5 minutes. And what I find is sometimes I had this one person I never forget who wanted to ask me questions, and it was like he was reading off of a script. And no matter what answer I gave, he didn't acknowledge the answer, didn't comprehend the answer, didn't ask any follow-up questions about the answer, and just went to the next question. It's like, I got to get through 10 questions with this person. I'm going to just boom, boom, boom. And it just felt odd, right, to me.
Yeah, well, they're clearly nervous, it sounds like.
Probably, or inexperienced, perhaps, something like that. And so I like what I find brings a conversation alive, and I like to break things down in sort of a mechanical engineering kind of way for easier comprehension, is ask questions about something that you just discovered in the last 5 minutes of the conversation. So, we had an outline for our talk today.
I know.
We had a skeleton, right? So if we got lost, we could always come back to what we had planned.
Sure, it's all good.
It's all good. And we've intentionally so, I've asked you lots of questions that I did not plan to ask, because you said something that prompted something, and that was really interesting, right? And I wanted to learn more. And so I just wanted to explain that and you have as well from me. So we're role modeling in some ways what a dynamic conversation looks like. of which neither one of us really knows how this conversation is going to end, because we're both being very present, right?
Exactly. I think it's also because, Victor, I think I love how you're thinking and approaching, and how you tease out certain threads and you dig in more. So, it's fun for me to hear somebody, and to kind of see how you're thinking.
Yeah, I'm weird that way.
Well, there's a reason why you're so good at what you do.
Thank
Right?
you.
I read your bio, top ranked, McKinsey analyst and well educated. Yeah, no, it's always very, very, I always learn. Like I said, I learn from every person that I talk to, and I'm learning a lot from you.
Likewise. All right, so back to dating advice, right? So if you don't want to be a friend and be put and sort of be labeled as a friend, don't act like a friend. Act like a potential romantic love interest.
Exactly.
Talk about that. You talked about getting to know your date and asking them questions. Anything else you would suggest for dating best practices based on all of your experience?
I think there's something to be said about civility and punctuality. And, there's so many other tips that one could offer, but I think one thing that's really important that I think we forget in today's world is common courtesy. And it goes such a long way. Being there in time. If you're being late, just notify your date. A proper greeting. It sounds old-fashioned, but because it doesn't happen enough, it will make the person stand out.
So tell me more about that, because that, for me, in my mind, that's sort of like, should be, I hope, and I hope my kids do this, I don't know for sure, like should be automatic. I would hope, right? Being polite on time. And is that not the norm? Like, tell me.
It is not the norm these days.
Really?
And it's funny because you could have some very, very high-end clients on dates and they may not behave particularly well. And it sends a bad message but inadvertently, even I just had two very high-end clients on a date, and one was late, and it just put a damper on things. And it happens more often than you think. Like to me and to yourself, I think we were probably have, polite parents, and we knew that we had to greet our elders and be polite and not be late. But I think in today's world, it happens so much. So I actually have to remind everybody, always be punctual, be on time, give a greeting. And also, even when the date ends, be courteous and say, thank you, I had a great time. It sounds silly to have to make this a reminder, but because it happens more often than you would think, I do put it out there.
Got it. And even at the elite client level, right? So these are very, very accomplished people, high net worth, high prestige professions. And so showing up on time is not always presumed to be the norm, like an automatic.
No, it's not always what it should be.
Wow. And is it like, I was intending to be on time and then major traffic jam, car accident, I couldn't be on time? Or there was not even an intention to be on time? I'm curious.
I think it's approach sometimes. I think there's a certain amount of arrogance that sometimes people will have, and they may not understand that, because if you think about on a date, they don't know the other person very well. Right. So therefore they may not take it as seriously as, let's just say, if they were being late for another CEO or something like that. So they may think of themselves as being more important. That goes back to the thread about, when you talk about relationships, it's just two people. It's not about the resume or my position above one or the other. And so it's always so important to realize that at the end of the day, it's two people. It's not a CEO and a hanger-on or something like that. So it's just, it's about attitude.
Yeah, so really treating people as sort of emotionally, in a way, sort of equals in terms of importance.
Exactly.
There isn't that hierarchy, even if you're quite successful in your career, that doesn't matter in these.
Exactly. Because if you think about it, one of my tips was what you put out influences what you get back. I think that's really important, because if you're being high-handed or arrogant and being just an unpleasant person, the people that will still be attracted to you will only be attracted to you not because of your personality, but because maybe something that you can provide them. So it becomes much more transactional, right? Okay. So I think it's really important to understand that how one behaves influences so much of the kind of people that you'll be attracted to.
Got it. So,
That
so
would
I want to drill down this one because I think it's an important point. So walk me through an example. So if you do a certain behavior that perhaps isn't ideal, how does that change who gets attracted and who doesn't?
So, for example, the one example I gave before was very kind of conventional, right? You have the wealthy individual and a so-called gold digger, right? That's a very kind of common trope.
Okay.
Another one could be if you're insecure or unsure, then you can inadvertently attract somebody who's quite controlling, right? And so that happens more often than we think. So therefore, I think that's also when we go into the influence and what you get back, it's also important for the person who's going out on a date to be their best self, right? Because if they're happy and they're bold and they're in their best self, then they will hopefully also attract back the person who appreciates that best self. I'm not saying that everybody has to be bouncy and happy and this, but they should be in a position of being their personal best.
Got it. And along those lines, I know you've mentioned in the past about sort of being self introspective or looking inward around your past relationship histories, your family histories that influences whether you show up as the best version of yourself or the worst version of yourself. Any thoughts around that in terms of knowing that history, in terms of how you show up and how do you get to the best version of yourself? What does that process look like?
I think it's about personal responsibility. It's so important because, you've always heard about relationships where somebody's always complaining about maybe their ex or their ex-boyfriend or their ex-spouse. But that's not a position of responsibility because you also have to understand that you were complicit in the dysfunctionality of a relationship. Mm-hmm. So I think it's upon us as people to look into ourselves, and to really hear feedback, versus just the rah-rah, you go girl, or everything was fine, that person's is terrible, but also understand your own responsibility for a breakdown in a relationship or, behavior that is unpleasant. It's just important to really know that and understand that and take responsibility. And I think sometimes what we have is it's hard for us to grow up, right? And it's painful to grow up. But part of that is, I'll give an example of my own self, is growing up and taking responsibility and drawing boundaries, right? That was hard for me to do. And then I would be resentful when people impinged upon my boundaries, realizing that I never drew them in the first place. And so as I've matured as a person, taking responsibility and drawing boundaries. And I think, for example, in Asian American culture, there's a lot with our parents, right? We're very respectful. We follow certain, we let our boundaries get pushed because we are supposed to be dutiful. But sometimes it's important to be able to push back because otherwise we get resentful. And if we're resentful, then we're going to carry that out into the rest of our lives. And the key is just to stop that and be able to say, hey, I'm not okay with this, but I'll do this and I won't be okay with that. And then you aren't as frazzled. And then you are happier in other aspects of your life.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is the things that people would complain about in a relationship, usually they kind of often blame the other person for it, right? So in your case with your family, it's why are they doing this to me? And in your own self-assessment, you realize, oh, I have not set limits. I'm contributing to the thing I don't like. And you are wise enough to realize it. You made your change and it makes life easier for yourself.
Absolutely. A common one is, my husband never picks up after himself. Everything's all messy, and then the flip side could be, well, I pride myself in saying, oh, I always work so hard. I always do everything because and then it makes, the person feel like superior. I'm doing everything. The house would not run without me. But then sometimes maybe the flip side is, are you letting the other person get a chance to do that and to take ownership of that as well? So it's always two sides.
Always two sides. Oh, interesting. Okay. So, it's sort of transitioning into sort of, best practice. It's a terrible word for romantic context, but let's use it. Best practice for romantic relationships. It sounds like understanding yourself is a big part of it. What are some other tips around how do you have a good marriage, a good romantic partner beyond just sort of knowing yourself?
Oh, romantic marriages, it's a lot of work. It always is work. And I think that sometimes we have this fairy tale ideal that it's just got two people and they all go off in the sunset. And I think that it's really important to understand the stressors that we have in life, whether it's work, children, finances, health, these, parents, family, it takes a lot of mental energy. So I think the prioritization is really important. I think many successful CEOs or executives don't necessarily acknowledge this because they're engrossed by their work, right? And so things get neglected. So I think, again, going back to the analogy earlier of like a plant, we have to plant flower, put water and fertilizer. I think it's important to really prioritize the relationship and to have actual one-on-one time for that connection, because couples are evolving. People are evolving. If they don't evolve together, then they will split. So I think it's always important to have those touch points where you can just meet up one-on-one and not necessarily only talk about the children or finances, but also just about what made you happy today. What were you doing? Something funny. That's important. I think prioritizing relationships is quite often not done enough. Another suggestion that I think is important is also communication. And this is a really easy one. So easy. You can go online. It's what is your love language? And that's kind of basically talking about knowing your audience, right? Knowing your partner and what matters to them. So, the love languages, physical touch, words of affirmation, quality time, etc., are so important that if you don't know what your partner really resonates with them, you're basically talking to a wall. And in Chinese, we call it playing the flute for the cow, 对牛弹琴. Like the scholar was playing this beautiful song, but meanwhile, it wasn't resonating with the audience, in this case, a cow, and the cow just moves. But the point, all laughing aside, the point is you really need to know what resonates with your partner. And it's not going to be what you think, but it's really what your partner can hear. And so, for example, with my husband, words of affirmation are really important, and physical touch. To me, words of affirmation, I just brush it off, right? So you have to really understand how to communicate with your partner.
Just sort of stepping back for 1 second around prioritization of the relationship and time. One of the things I actually in the middle of writing an article, so I started it before our conversation. I'm going to it next around priorities, right? Sort of both at the corporate level, at the career level, and the personal level. And one of the things I say is that it's very easy to say our priority is blank, right? Our priority is to drive sales. Our priority is my kids and my family. Our priority is my spouse. It's much harder to change behavior. And one of the things I have my clients do is I do a calendar analysis, right? So yeah, so if let's say in the work setting, if the priority is, I had a client years ago, he said the priority is to drive more sales. It was like a two-person business. Okay? And so I get color code your calendar and color code all the activities like in blue, and then color code the thing that's important to you, in this case, driving sales, in red, okay? And show me your entire month, right? And in that analysis, he determined that I think he was driving $1 million in sales, doing 30 minutes of sales a month.
Wow.
Yes. Right? Sometimes you just got to ask the right questions. And yes. So like, I wonder, so you're pulling 30 minutes of sales time a month, is the only person selling. You're pulling down $1 million in sales. My strong recommendation is to spend an hour a month.
Exactly.
Maybe 4 hours a month, maybe 4 hours a day.
I know.
Right. And so I sort of almost sort of intentionally, so I know him quite well, was to sort of like, almost shame him into it of like the obviousness of the solution. Right.
Well, and it's just one of us, right?
Right. Yeah, sometimes it is, but you got to do the numbers. I had another client who, in your demographic in terms of clientele, and it's like my priority is my family, right? Like that's like motherhood apple pie. Who would ever disagree with that?
Yeah.
And I said, no, well, show me your calendar, right? 24-hour-day calendar. Where's the time with your family, right? With each child, right? And with your spouse, with all of them together, and it's like 1% of the time, right? It's wow. Incongruent, right? And or in corporate strategy, if our effort is to grow our distribution in Asia or in Europe, what percentage of your staff is working on expanding into Europe? What percentage of your budget is allocated to expanding to Europe? Yeah, so it's allocation of resources. So the time here I'm seeing is, if you want to have a good relationship, it's got to be featured in your calendar, and you got to devote time, attention, and energy to it. Otherwise, the grass doesn't get watered, right?
Yeah, it's just words. I loved your analytical approach, of course, a consultant, right? Everything.
I can't help it. It's like breathing.
No, I would be thinking, well, how do I measure that? Of course, you measure it by the calendar and the time spent. That's makes so much sense. Of course. Yeah, no, that's important.
And for those who don't know about the 5 love languages, it's a book, very popular in the United States.
Yes.
I don't know how well it is outside, but it's this idea that how people experience love varies by the individual, and there's sort of 5 types of love. You mentioned several of them, and the idea is, the premise of the book is, give love in the way that the person prefers to receive it, that feels loving to them, which might be different, and often it's different than what you would assume, because you are a different person than they are. So, I certainly can appreciate that.
Yeah, no, it's very useful. It's something that I learned a lot from. There's actually an online link for that too. I think you can do it. You can do a test yourself.
Okay, cool, perfect. So Google's a great resource for finding those. Sort of as we sort of wrap up, Cassindy, any final thoughts on non-traditional career paths, dating, having a great romantic relationship? When you step back from it all and everything you've experienced and learned from your own experiences and from your clients' experiences, any last final words that you want people to hear?
Wow, that's a really open-ended question, Victor.
It's by design. And if not, totally fine too. But I wanted to give you that opportunity in case you had anything that
I think it sounds silly and it sounds trite, but I think life is meant to be a little fun. I think quite often we agonize and we have too much anxiety. I think sometimes just go into it always with an approach that I'm going to learn something new. I'm going to have some fun. I think that if you go with that mindset, doesn't really matter what you're doing. It just makes it a lot more enjoyable and sustainable.
That's great. Sometimes the best things are fairly simple, not always easy to execute in real life, but
well, absolutely, Victor. I was, to be honest, I was like, oh, well, I'll be talking to, Victor today. And I think at first I was like, oh, well, this is a high-powered consultant. It's going to be really, difficult. But I realized, let's just have fun, because when we first spoke, I thought this is such an engaging person, and I've learned something. In fact, today I just now learned how to quantify time spent and to use it as a tool to achieve goals, for me, and I'll use that on my clients as well. So I learned something a lot today. So it's great.
Likewise, we're taking notes here in my head. I'm going to jot them down after we finish up. And so I want to thank you so much for making the time. I've enjoyed chatting with you multiple occasions now, and I'm sure we'll still be in touch going forward.
Absolutely.
For those who want to learn more about your background, your matchmaking practice, or getting in touch with you, what's the best way to reach you?
Sure. Thank you so much, Victor. I really appreciate it today. The way to reach me is my website is www.awmlove.com, which is Ancient Wisdom, Modern Love. And my email is just Cassindy@awmlove.com, CASSINDY@awmlove.com. And I look forward to hearing from people.
Perfect. Thanks so much. A pleasure and such a treat for myself and for hopefully the hosts that were watching this as well. So thank you for making the time. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Victor. Likewise. I learned a lot from you today. Thanks.